Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're really cutting through the noise in enterprise IT risk management.
hmm
We're launching a focused, scenario-based deep dive into the world of CRISC, that's certified in risk and information systems control.
Yeah, and this is absolutely critical knowledge, I think, for anyone moving from maybe a purely technical role into something more like governance or strategic risk.
Right.
The CRISC, which comes from ISACA, it's not just like another piece of paper. It really validates your ability to manage IT risks, holistically, making sure they're always seen in the context of the bigger business strategy.
Another bridge builder.
It really is. It connects those technical controls with the executive decision-making, the real-world business risk.
Exactly. So our mission today, a fast-paced deep dive. We're going through the 4 core CRISC domains using some expert practice scenarios. We really want to unpack that ISACA way, that specific governance-focused approach you absolutely have to master for the exam.
That's the plan. We'll hit the key concepts across governance, IT risk assessment, risk response and reporting, and importantly, we'll also touch on the technical grounding you need from Domain 4, information technology and security.
So this is for you listening in, whether you're deep in study mode, just keeping up with your CPEs, or honestly, if you just want to think more like a top-tier risk practitioner.
Let's get started.
Okay, let's definitely unpack this. And we'll start right at the top, where any good risk program has to begin, governance.
Right.
Domain 1, governance. This is the big one, right? The cornerstone. It accounts for, 26% of the exam?
That's right, the largest single chunk.
And it's really all about making sure IT risk management activities, well, they align perfectly with and actively support the organization's big picture strategic goals.
Absolutely. If you don't nail the governance structure and the culture right from the start, everything that follows your risk assessments, control implementations, they could easily be misdirected.
Wasting resources, basically.
Yeah, wasting resources, yeah, and failing to protect what actually drives the business forward. You have to get the foundation right.
Okay, let's kick off with the classic alignment scenario. Imagine a big global manufacturing firm. They're rethinking their risk governance structure because they want to support a major strategic push, let's say expanding fast into some new, highly regulated international markets.
Okay, complex environment.
Definitely. So the risk committee, their job is to make sure the IT risk management stuff aligns with this aggressive expansion strategy. So Quinn's question 1, what action is most critical for them to achieve this strategic alignment? Is it A, regularly updating the IT risk register for new geopolitical risks? B, ensuring risk management objectives are explicitly linked to those strategic business goals? C, conducting mandatory training for employees on international risk awareness? Or D, implementing some advanced risk analytics tools to watch cross-border threat data?
Okay, thinking about the highest level of governance here, the answer that ISAC is looking for, the most critical, is B. Ensure risk management objectives are explicitly linked to the strategic business goals.
Okay, B. Now, I can almost hear people listening, especially experienced folks, saying, hang on, updating the register, doing training, we do that all the time. That feels practical, immediate.
Yeah.
Why does Isaac insist that B, linking objectives to goals, is the most critical?
That's a great point because it highlights the ISAC perspective. Governance fundamentally demands that top-down approach. So A, C, and D, updating registers, training, getting fancy tools. Those are all important supportive activities, but they need to be driven by the objectives.
Oh, okay.
Option B is the fundamental structure, the linkage. If the risk team's objective is just, say, reduce vulnerabilities, well, that's okay, but it doesn't specifically align with that expansion strategy we talked about.
Right.
But if the objective is something like ensure zero compliance failure risk in our new European markets within the next 12 months, that objective is directly tied to the strategic goal of expansion. Governance is the process that makes sure the risk budget, the resources, the team's focus are all pointed squarely at those strategic priorities. Without B, you've got activity, sure, but maybe not strategic alignment.
And that strategic link naturally leads us to thinking about, well, how much risk is okay? Which brings us to risk appetite.
Exactly. Tolerance.
Okay, next scenario. Picture a logistics company. They're reviewing their governance framework. They want to seriously improve how their IT risk management lines up with their business objectives, and a key objective for them is minimizing logistical delays.
Makes sense for logistics.
So quiz question 2. What action should they prioritize first to really lay the groundwork for this better alignment and define that tolerance level?
Yep.
Is it A, updating the IT risk management policy document, B, conducting a risk appetite workshop with the executive leadership, C, establishing key risk indicators, KRIs, for logistics downtime, Or D, implementing a balanced scorecard approach for their IT services.
Again, thinking foundational steps here. We have to prioritize B, conducting a risk appetite workshop with executive leadership.
Right, the workshop. Now, I know from experience, a lot of companies might, skip the formal workshop. They might just update the policy, option A, based on what they think leadership wants. Why is that workshop seen as the essential first step, the thing that has to happen before policy updates or setting metrics?
This is a perfect example of where, the day-to-day practice might differ from the formal ISACA standard, the ISACA way, that workshop. That's the dedicated time and place where the board and the executive team formally hash out and define the level and the type of risk the organization is actually willing to accept to hit its strategic goals.
Okay, so it's about getting it explicit.
Exactly. It's a crucial output. Often you get a formal risk appetite statement out of it. You simply can't write a truly meaningful guiding IT risk policy, like in option A, or define the critical thresholds for your KRIs, like in C, until you have that clear documented mandate from the very top.
So the workshop locks in the executive buy-in.
Locks in buy-in, provides clarity. It's the non-negotiable prerequisite for all the alignment efforts that follow. If the risk team is just guessing what the board will tolerate, the whole program is, it's fundamentally flawed from a governance perspective.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly to accountability. That's a huge governance concern these days, right?
Yeah.
Especially with all the regulatory pressure.
Massive.
So imagine a tech company. They're rapidly expanding their use of public cloud services, and they're understandably very concerned about meeting complex, constantly changing data protection rules across different countries. GDPR, CCPA, you name it.
A common headache.
Absolutely. Quiz question 3. What should this company prioritize within its governance framework to proactively address these compliance worries? Is it A, implementing a really comprehensive data encryption and tokenization strategy? B, conducting regular independent compliance audits and assessments? C, developing a super robust, maybe even machine speed incident response plan? Or D, immediately hiring a third-party compliance consultant to rewrite all their policies?
Okay, the key word here is proactive assurance. To meet that governance mandate, the answer has got to be B, conducting regular independent compliance audits and assessments.
Our B again, help us draw the lines here, because strong encryption, option A, feels like a really strong control. And bringing in consultants, option D, that's often the very first thing companies do in the real world. Why are the audits the top governance priority, according to ISACA?
Good question. Controls like encryption are powerful, absolutely, but they're just one piece of the puzzle for meeting a complex regulation like GDPR.
Right, it's broader than just one control.
Much broader. Plus, a control is sort of static at the point of implementation. Governance requires assurance that the entire system, the processes, the controls, the training, the documentation, is actually working effectively over time. Audits and assessments are the formal mechanisms for that. They ensure ongoing adherence, and crucially, they proactively identify where things might be going wrong before a major breach or fine.
So incident response C is too late, it's reactive?
Exactly. C deals with failure after it happens. Audits, option B, represent the board's due diligence. They provide essential transparency and confirm that the resources invested in compliance are actually being used effectively to meet the requirements and manage risk before disaster strikes.
Makes sense.
And this ties right back to that broader governance theme: transparency and accountability. Good governance frameworks demand clear reporting lines, defined responsibilities. If an audit, like in B, uncovers a compliance gap, that accountability framework needs to clearly state who owns fixing it and how that failure gets reported up the chain, all the way to the board if necessary. This ensures everyone understands the true level of residual risk compared to that risk appetite we defined earlier.
Okay, so we've seen Domain 1 isn't really about the tech solutions themselves. It's more about the strategic alignment, mandating the structure, the oversight.
Precisely.
And this leads us straight into why the CRISC exam needs a very specific study approach. It's not just about what you do day to day.
That's exactly right. You absolutely have to understand the formal framework standard, what we're calling the ISACA way. Look, practical on-the-job experience is vital. You need it to even qualify for the exam. But relying only on that experience can actually mislead you during the test.
How so?
Well, you might use a practical workaround every day at your job because it's quick or efficient in your specific context. But the exam, it's testing the textbook, governance-centric, top-down, often cost-effective in the long-run approach. It's a different mindset.
and this is really critical for anyone planning to take the exam, those passing rates, they often hover around 50%, right? It's tough.
It is. It's a challenging exam. 4 hours, 150 multiple choice questions. And they're not just recall, they test application and analysis. You have to pick the best answer according to ISAC's perspective.
So if you're serious about passing, especially getting that scaled score of 450 or higher.
You have to commit. We're talking probably 120 to 150 hours of dedicated, focused study time, minimum. And the smartest way to use that time, targeted practice. Lots of it.
Which is where specialized preparation resources come in. You need something that mirrors the CRISC scenario format. Tools like FlashGenius, for instance. They don't just throw questions at you. They offer full exam simulations, real-time scoring, and, importantly, targeted learning based on your performance.
Yes, that targeted learning capability is absolutely key. Because a good tool won't just tell you that you got a question wrong. It'll help you understand why. It analyzes your mistake, maps it back to the underlying governance principle or the specific ISA concept you missed.
So it turns mistakes into learning opportunities.
Exactly. Every error becomes a precise learning moment. That's vital for truly internalizing that ISACA way, that formal framework thinking you need to consistently pick the best answer, not just a right answer, in those tricky, nuanced scenarios.
Right. Mastering those scenarios, especially in domains 1 and 2, which are very governance-heavy, that's really what separates someone who passes from someone who just relies on their field experience.
Couldn't agree more.
Okay, so let's move on. Let's apply that framework thinking now to the actual threat landscape in Domain 2. All right, Domain 2. IT risk assessment. This one's about 20% of the exam. And the focus here shifts to actually defining the threat landscape, analyzing the probability and impact of risks, and making sure those assessments are, repeatable and consistent.
So we move from setting the governance rules in Domain 1 to now applying a rigorous method for identifying and analyzing risks. The main goal here is really to quantify and qualify the risks the organization is facing, so we can then make informed decisions about how to respond.
Okay, let's start with maybe the most fundamental distinction in risk assessment, one that honestly still trips up a lot of professionals.
Oh yeah, inherent versus residual.
Yeah.
Critical.
Quiz question 4. What is the primary sort of textbook difference between inherent risk and residual risk?
Okay, the answer that aligns perfectly with the ISAC standard is this. Inherent risk is the level of risk before you apply any controls, any safeguards, any mitigating actions. It's the raw risk.
Okay, raw risk.
While residual risk is the risk that's left over, the risk remaining after those controls have been implemented are up and running and, importantly, have been deemed effective.
So, quick example.
Yeah.
A bank storing millions of credit card numbers. That activity itself is inherently high risk.
Right.
Regardless of the firewalls or encryption they have.
Exactly. The inherent risk comes from the nature of the activity storing sensitive data, the complexity of the system, how critical it is to the business. Residual risk, then, is what you figure out by looking at the likelihood of a breach or a failure with those controls, the firewalls, the encryption, the monitoring, working as they should.
Got it.
And a common trap people fall into is assuming that just because you implemented a control, the residual risk automatically drops significantly.
Right, but maybe the control isn't working well.
Precisely. If those controls are poorly designed or misconfigured, or maybe they're not being monitored properly, the residual risk might actually stay dangerously high, even if the inherent risk was huge to begin with. The gap between inherent and residual tells you if your investment in controls is actually paying off. Hashtag tag 3.2, assessing inherent risk in emerging technology.
Okay, let's take that inherent versus residual idea and apply it to something cutting edge. Imagine a tech startup. They're doing a risk assessment for their brand new sauce product. This product relies heavily on proprietary machine learning algorithms to make automated lending decisions.
Okay, high stakes, emerging tech.
Definitely. Quiz question 5. When they're assessing the inherent risk of this product, what's a critical risk factor they absolutely need to consider? Is it A, the numerical accuracy and precision of the algorithms? B, the potential for biased outcomes or unfair discrimination in the algorithm's results? C, the speed and the computational horsepower needed for the algorithms? Or D, the user interface design of the sauce dashboard?
Okay, remember, we're focused on inherent risk, the vulnerability baked into the design itself, before we even think about controls. Given the nature of automated lending and the current regulatory and ethical climate, the most critical inherent risk here is B, the potential for biased outcomes or unfair discrimination in the algorithm results.
Interesting. Why B over A, accuracy? I mean, surely inaccurate algorithms lead to bad business decisions, which is a risk, right?
It is a risk, absolutely. But in a governance context, especially the ISACA view, accuracy A is often seen more as a quality control issue or a performance metric. Biased outcomes B, however, represent a much deeper, more systemic inherent vulnerability. We're talking massive potential legal fallout, huge ethical concerns, and potentially crippling reputational damage.
Ah, so the impact is potentially much greater.
Way greater and more fundamental. If the data used to train the algorithm was flawed or biased from the start, then the inherent risk of breaking anti-discrimination laws, for example, is baked right into the system from day one. You can try to mitigate it later with monitoring or adjustments, but that inherent risk remains incredibly significant because of the nature of the data and how the system is being used. That makes B the far bigger governance concern, hashtag 3.3. Assessing inherent risk in third-party integration.
Okay, let's shift to another common risk area, third parties and supply chains. Picture a big e-commerce company. They're evaluating the risks of integrating several new third-party APIs, maybe for real-time inventory tracking or dynamic pricing.
Very common scenario.
So quiz question 6. When they assess the inherent risk that comes with this integration, which factors should they prioritize? Is it A, the financial stability and long-term viability of the third-party vendor? B, the complexity of actually integrating the API and managing its configuration? C, the underlying security architecture and the controls that the third-party provider has implemented? Or D, the potential hit to revenue if that API goes down for, say, 10 hours?
Focusing again on inherent risk, the priority has to be C, the underlying security architecture and controls implemented by the third-party provider.
Okay, C. Let me challenge that slightly from a practical viewpoint. In the real world, if that vendor in option A goes bankrupt, my business could be seriously impacted, maybe even fail if I rely on them heavily. Why is the third-party security the #1 factor for assessing inherent risk, according to this framework?
That's a fair challenge because business continuity is crucial. But remember the definition. Inherent risk is the risk before you apply your own compensating controls. When you integrate a third-party API, you are essentially extending your security boundary, your trust zone, into their environment.
Right, you're connecting your systems.
Exactly. So their baseline security posture, their architecture, their controls, that determines the fundamental initial risk to the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of your data and services at that connection point. If their infrastructure is inherently weak, your inherent risk skyrockets, regardless of how financially healthy they might seem today.
So financial stability A is more of a continuity risk, a different category.
Precisely. Financial stability is vital, but it falls more under business continuity or vendor viability risk. The third-party security architecture defines the immediate baseline IT risk exposure you inherit the moment you connect. That's the inherent risk focus for CRISC SC. Hashtag 3.4. Necessary assessment methodologies.
Okay, different angle now. Let's talk about the actual methods or tools we use for assessment. An insurance company needs to figure out the strategic and financial impact of potential new regulations, specifically a set of climate risk reporting requirements that a financial regulator might impose soon, but hasn't yet.
Okay, forward-looking assessment.
Quiz question 7. What specific methodology should this company use to assess this particular risk? A, a regulatory impact analysis, or RIA. B, a broad, comprehensive operational risk assessment. C, an external compliance audit. Or D, a threat modeling exercise.
For this specific need, evaluating the future effects of proposed or potential regulation, the most precise and appropriate tool is A, a regulatory impact analysis, RIA.
An RIA. This really highlights the need to pick the right analytical tool for the job, doesn't it? How is an RIA different from, say, a general operational risk assessment, B, or a compliance audit, C?
Great distinction to make. An operational risk assessment, B, is typically much broader. It looks at potential failures in existing internal processes, people, systems, external events. A compliance audit, C, looks backwards, or at the present, it checks if you're adhering to current existing rules and regulations.
Okay.
An RIA, however, is specifically forward-looking. It's designed to systematically assess the likely economic, financial, operational, and strategic effects of potential or upcoming regulatory changes. For a CRISC professional advising leadership, knowing the difference is crucial. Using the right tool like an RIA means you're not wasting resources on overly broad assessments, and you can provide much more accurate predictive guidance to the executive team about what's coming down the pike.
All right, let's move into the heavyweight domain, Domain 3, risk response and reporting. This is actually the largest single part of the exam curriculum.
That's right, 32%, a big focus area.
So we've identified risks in Domain 1. Assess them in Domain 2. Now, Domain 3 is all about choosing the best way to treat those risks and then, crucially, communicating the results effectively, especially up the chain.
Exactly. You can think of this domain as the translation layer. It tests if you can analyze the cost of putting in controls versus the benefit you get from reducing the risk. And critically, it checks if you can report on risk exposure using the language the business understands, dollars, strategic impact, not just technical jargon.
Translating tech risk into business risk.
This is the essence of it.
Okay, scenario time again. Let's take a major telecommunications company. They're worried about the risk of critical service outages because they depend heavily on a single, absolutely necessary third-party API. And let's say there's no immediate alternative available.
A classic single point of failure problem.
Exactly. Quiz question 8. What is the most effective and generally acceptable risk response for them to minimize this risk while still being able to deliver their competitive services? Is it A, avoid using the API altogether and just build the capability in-house? B, transfer the financial risk by buying some hefty liability insurance? C, mitigate the risk by implementing extensive redundancy and failover mechanisms? Or D, just accept the risk because the service is so crucial for competitiveness?
Okay, thinking about the preferred strategies in the ISACA framework, especially for critical, necessary risks where avoidance isn't really feasible, the answer here is C, mitigate the risk by implementing redundancy and failover mechanisms.
C, mitigation. Now, from a purely practical, maybe short-term cost perspective, building it in-house, avoidance A, or just buying insurance, transfer B, might seem cheaper up front sometimes. Why does the CRISC philosophy lean towards investing in mitigation C in a case like this?
That's a key point. The CRISC key framework strongly prioritizes enhancing business resilience and continuity. Option A, avoidance, often means giving up a strategic capability or market advantage, which might not be acceptable.
Right, they need the service.
They need the service. Option B, transferring risk via insurance, is primarily a financial fix. It pays you back after the outage happens, but it does absolutely nothing to prevent the actual operational disruption, the potential reputational damage, the customer churn.
So insurance doesn't stop the problem, just pays for it later.
Exactly. Mitigation C, through things like redundancy or failover systems, directly tackles both the likelihood and the impact of the failure itself. It aims to ensure continuity. Now, importantly, before landing on C, the risk professional needs to ensure a solid cost-benefit analysis, CBA, has been done.
The CBA.
Right. You need to make sure the cost of building that redundancy is justified when weighed against the strategic importance of the service, linking back to Domain 1, and the organization's defined risk appetite. But generally, for critical functions, mitigation is often the most balanced and strategically sound approach because it keeps the business running.
Okay, so let's say we've implemented our mitigation strategy, maybe that failover system. Now we need to report on the current state of risk. Back to our e-commerce company. They're still suffering frequent, unpredictable downtime, especially during peak sales periods like holidays. The risk team needs to get this message across to senior management how severe and urgent this is.
They need to make it hit home.
Exactly. Quiz question 9. Which key risk indicator, KRI, would be the most effective in communicating this risk and actually motivating the executives to make a decision, maybe approve more resources? Is it A, the number of server overload incidents per month? B, the percentage of sales lost due to system downtime? C, the average server response time during peak hours? Or D, the total number of virtual machines they're using?
This is all about audience. For senior management, the single most impactful KRI here is almost always B, percentage of sales lost due to system downtime.
B. Yeah, that feels like a classic example of speaking the language of the business. Why do the other options, the more technical metrics like A, C, or D, often fall flat at that executive level?
Because executive leaders, the board, they operate under that governance mandate we talked about, focusing on strategy, finance, overall business health. Options A, C, and D are more like key performance indicators, KPIs, or just operational metrics. They measure activity or the technical state.
Right. How busy the system is, not the impact.
Exactly. A true key risk indicator, a KRI, needs to act as an early warning signal that risk levels are approaching or exceeding the agreed-upon risk appetite. And it needs to be framed in terms the business understands. When you quantify the risk as X% of potential sales lost, you are directly linking the technical failure to concrete financial consequences.
Money talks.
Money talks. It immediately translates that technical problem, servers are slow, into a critical business problem, we're losing money and customers, that demands strategic attention and resource allocation. That's the whole point of effective risk reporting upwards. Hashtag 4.3, measuring control effectiveness, KCIs.
Okay, so we've reported the risk using KRIs. Management approved our mitigation plan. Now we need to make sure the controls we put in place, maybe those new security monitoring tools or the failover system, are actually working.
Verification is key.
Let's say a retail company implemented new access controls to try and reduce the risk of internal data theft within their supply chain management system.
Okay.
Quiz question 10. Which type of metrics should this company prioritize to ensure these new controls are effectively reducing the risk over time? Is it A, key risk indicators, KRIs, B, key performance indicators, KPIs,
Yeah.
C, key control indicators, KCIs, or D, return on investment, ROI?
To measure the effectiveness of the controls themselves, we need to prioritize C, key control indicators, KCIs.
Okay, KCI. We've mentioned KRI, KPI, and now KCI. Can we just quickly solidify the difference for everyone listening? It can get confusing.
Absolutely. It's a crucial distinction in the main three. Think of it like a hierarchy of monitoring, maybe.
Okay.
KPIs, key performance indicators, generally measure efficiency and performance. Think, did we do the process quickly? How many widgets did we make?
Operational efficiency.
Right. KIs, key risk indicators, as we just discussed, monitor the overall risk level. They act as warning signals. Is the overall risk of downtime getting too close to our appetite limit?
Risk level itself.
Exactly. Now, KCIs, key control indicators, are different. They specifically measure the operational status, the health, and the effectiveness of the controls you've implemented to mitigate a specific risk.
So is the control actually working?
Precisely. Examples of KCIs might be percentage of critical systems where security logs are reviewed daily, according to policy, or number of failed login attempts blocked by the new access control system, or mean time between failures of the failover mechanism during testing. KCIs give management direct assurance or warning about whether the specific risk treatments they invested in are functioning as designed. They confirm due diligence, hashtag 4.4, the strategic role of KCIs.
Building right on that KCI concept, let's take that telecommunications company again. They're reviewing their framework of KCIs because they want to improve their risk monitoring. They want to make sure they're not just measuring a bunch of stuff that doesn't really matter strategically.
Avoiding metric noise.
Exactly. Quiz question 11. What is the most important strategic consideration when they are designing effective KCIs? Is it A, KCIs should be based purely on whatever technical system metrics are easily available? B, KCIs must align directly with the company's strategic objectives and its defined risk appetite? C, KCIs should focus exclusively on calculating the cost savings achieved by the controls? Or D, KCIs should only be reviewed and updated during the annual financial audit cycle?
We have to loop right back to the very first principle of CRISC, back to domain 1. The single most important strategic consideration here is B. KCIs must align with the company's strategic objectives and defined risk appetite.
So even a very technical sounding metric like patching compliance percentage, it still has to serve a larger strategic purpose to be a good KCI.
Absolutely, 100%. If your company's big strategic objective is, say, rapid and secure migration to the cloud while maintaining the highest data privacy standards, then your most important KCIs should measure the effectiveness of controls related specifically to things like data residency, encryption key management, and access controls within that new cloud environment.
Got it.
If you have a KCI that shows a control is working perfectly, but that control only protects some old legacy system that's about to be switched off, well, that KCI has zero strategic value today. Alignment ensures that the assurance you're providing upwards, based on these KCIs, is directly relevant to where the organization is going, what its current goals are, and what its tolerance for risk is right now. It connects the technical control effectiveness back to the overall governance picture. That holistic view is the absolute essence of the ISACA framework.
Okay, wow. We have covered a lot of ground already. We've spent significant time detailing governance in Domain 1, assessment in Domain 2, and that big one, responsible reporting in Domain 3.
Yeah.
That's really the strategic core of CRISC.
The governance heart of it.
But now we need to transition. Make sure we touch on the technical grounding that's required for any risk practitioner to be truly effective. And that brings us to the final domain, Domain 4, information technology and security. This makes up the remaining 22% of the exam.
Yeah, and you can think of Domain 4 as the practitioner's, sort of, reality check. You don't need to be a deep-level coder or a systems architect necessarily.
Right, not expected to be the hands-on techie.
Not necessarily the primary techie, no. But you must understand the inherent security vulnerabilities, the relevant control frameworks, the concepts related to the technology you are governing and assessing risk for. This domain ensures you can actually understand what the tech teams are talking about, and crucially, translate that technical risk accurately and meaningfully for the board and executive management. Hashtag 5.1, BCM, and disaster recovery planning.
Okay, so a major piece of Domain 4 is business continuity management, BCM, and disaster recovery, DR. And this isn't just about, getting systems back online after something bad happens. It's really about defining upfront how much downtime the business can actually tolerate.
Exactly. It starts with the business impact.
So let's do a quick scenario here. Scenario 12, BCM focus. We've got a large financial institution. They've identified their core trading platform as absolutely critical. Maybe you generate $5 million in revenue every single hour it's operational.
High stakes.
Very. When they're drafting the business continuity plan for this platform, which metrics should they prioritize to define the system recovery requirements based on that business need? Is it A, the mean time between failures, MTBF?
Yeah.
B, the recovery time objective, RTO? C, the maximum tolerable downtime, MTD, sometimes called maximum acceptable outage, MAO, or D, the total cost of replacing all the infrastructure involved?
Okay, the metric that fundamentally defines the urgency based on that huge business impact, $5 million an hour, is C, the maximum tolerable downtime, MTD.
MTD. Okay, can you explain briefly why the MTD option C is the driver for the RTO option B? People sometimes mix those up.
They do. It's common. MTD is the absolute breaking point. It's the maximum duration the business can survive without that critical function, the trading platform in this case, before the consequences become unacceptable or catastrophic, massive financial losses, regulatory fines, permanent reputational damage, whatever it might be.
So MTD is a business decision.
Critically, yes. MTD is a business decision, ideally driven by a thorough business impact analysis, BIA, not just a technical guess. The recovery time objective, RTO, option B, is the target time set for IT to actually recover the system and get it back online. And the RTO must always be defined to be significantly less than the MTD.
You have some buffer.
Exactly. If the business says the MTD is, say, 4 hours, then IT might set an RTO of 2 hours. This provides a crucial buffer zone for unforeseen problems during the recovery process. The CRISC professional's role here is often to facilitate that BIA process, ensuring the business properly defines the MTD so that the technical targets like RTO and also recovery point objective, RPO, are appropriately aligned with genuine business requirements. Hashtag 5.2, securing emerging technologies. Domain 4 also absolutely requires you to have specific knowledge of how risk shows up in modern IT setups, which, let's face it, are moving way beyond those traditional network perimeters we used to rely on.
Things are definitely more complex now. Cloud, serverless containers.
Exactly. So, scenario 13, emerging tech focus. Imagine a healthcare provider. They're migrating their core patient data systems, super sensitive stuff, to a really complex cloud environment. They're using serverless functions, containerized applications, maybe microservices. What core security principles should the risk team emphasize most heavily to address the increased complexity and that sort of erosion of clear boundaries in this new architecture? Is it A, implementing really robust traditional perimeter firewalls? B, adopting a strict zero-trust architecture model? C, making sure all their developers use rigid waterfall development methodologies? Or D, maintaining data redundancy across, say, 5 different geographic regions? Given this modern, distributed, almost perimeterless environment, the most essential strategic security principle they need to adopt is B, adopting a strict zero-trust architecture model.
Zero trust. Okay, traditional firewalls, option A. That's been the standard for years. Why is that suddenly insufficient here?
Well, it's not just insufficient, it's almost irrelevant for large parts of this architecture. Serverless functions, containers communicating directly with each other, often within the cloud provider's network, these things largely eliminate the concept of a single, static, defensible perimeter where you could just put a big firewall.
Traffic doesn't always cross that old boundary.
Exactly. Internal traffic, east-west traffic becomes much more significant. Zero trust fundamentally changes the assumption. It mandates that no user, no device, no application is inherently trusted, even if it's already inside what used to be the network perimeter. Everything requires continuous authentication and authorization for every single request, regardless of its location.
Never trust, always verify.
That's the mantra. It's really the only governance-centric control strategy that effectively mitigates the inherent risks of things like compromised credentials being used for lateral movement within these highly distributed dynamic cloud environments. The risk team absolutely needs to understand this fundamental shift in security philosophy to ensure the technical controls being proposed are actually appropriate for the modern architecture being assessed. Hashtag tag 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 5.3. Understanding data privacy and protection principles.
And we can't talk IT and security risk without hitting data privacy again. It remains a massive risk driver globally. The CRISC key holder has to understand the core principles that drive compliance risk in this area.
Absolutely non-negotiable knowledge.
Scenario 14, privacy focus. An organization operates globally, so they're subject to multiple regulations, let's say GDPR in Europe and CCPA in California. They're implementing a new marketing system that's designed to collect very detailed customer behavioral data. The risk manager needs to advise the development team on the single most important mandatory privacy principle they must adhere to by design right from the beginning. Is it A, data minimization, B, data replication, C, data monetization, or D, perpetual data retention?
Okay, thinking about the foundational principles embedded in modern comprehensive privacy laws like GDPR and CCPA, the absolute cornerstone principle they must build in from the start is A, data minimization.
Data minimization. How does focusing on that specific principle help reduce the overall compliance risk for the organization?
It's fundamental. Data minimization dictates that the organization should only collect, process, and store the absolute minimum amount of personal data that is strictly necessary to achieve a specific, legitimate, and stated purpose.
Don't collect it if you don't truly need it.
Exactly. This directly reduces the inherent risk exposure right off the bat. If you don't hold the data, you can't lose it in a breach, you can't misuse it, you can't have it subject to complex access requests. It simplifies everything. Furthermore, minimizing the data you collect makes it significantly easier to comply with other core privacy principles, like purpose limitation, only using data for the reason you collected it, and storage limitation, not keeping data forever.
So it has knock-on benefits for compliance.
Huge knock-on benefits. It dramatically eases the overall compliance burden and significantly lowers the potential impact, including the risk of those massive regulatory fines we hear about. The risk manager's role here is to ensure this principle isn't an afterthought, but is mandated during the system design phase, embedding privacy by design and linking those technical decisions right back to the governance Domain 1 requirements and the organization's compliance obligations.
Wow, okay. We have really powered through a lot of concepts, touching on all 4 domains, and importantly, seeing how they interconnect, how governance influences technology choices, how assessment informs response, how reporting needs to speak the business language.
It's definitely a holistic framework.
And to kind of summarize the effort needed here, the big takeaway for the CRISC exam is that it's not just a test of knowledge recall, it's really an application test. Can you apply these principles in realistic scenarios?
That's exactly right. The crucial insight I think we need to reinforce is that true mastery for this exam comes from that targeted practice, specifically working through complex scenario analysis questions. You have to push beyond just understanding the definitions and really focus on synthesizing the information, applying the ISACA mindset to choose the best course of action among several plausible options.
And remember that time commitment we mentioned earlier, 120 to 150 hours of dedicated focused study. That's a significant investment. And given the weightings like Domain 3 on responsive reporting being so large, and the foundational importance of Domain 1 on governance, you really need to allocate your practice time strategically.
Absolutely. And this is precisely where using intelligent study tools can make a massive difference in efficiency. If you know, for instance, that you consistently struggle with those subtle but critical distinctions between KRIs, KPIs, and KCIs, which are absolutely central to Domain 3.
Yeah, those can be tricky.
They can be. So you should leverage features like, say, AI-guided learning paths or smart review functions that you find in specialized prep tools like FlashGenius. These tools can identify your specific weaknesses based on your practice results and then automatically serve you more questions focused on those concepts you're struggling with, forcing you to practice them until you really internalize the correct governance-centric response. It's about efficient, targeted learning.
Makes sense. And the return on investment, the ROI we touched on earlier, it's pretty clear, isn't it? CRISC holders consistently command a salary premium. We often see increases of 10%, maybe 15%, or even more almost immediately after getting certified.
Yeah, the market recognizes the value.
So this isn't just about adding another credential to your resume. It's genuinely about boosting your professional credibility, gaining that strategic seat at the table where the important risk decisions are actually being discussed and made.
And that investment, The time, the resources for study materials, and the exam fee, which can add up to a few $1,000s, that financial cost is often recouped within just 1 or 2 years, purely through that increased earning potential. But maybe more importantly, the skills and the perspective you gain from the CRISC framework really position you for leadership roles moving up to become a director of risk management, maybe even a CISO someday. Roles that absolutely demand that strategic understanding that CRISC provides. Hashtag tag outro.
Well, you've just navigated a pretty rigorous rapid-fire assessment with us across all 4 core CRISC domains. We really hope this deep dive has helped clarify some of those key distinctions, especially between technical controls and strategic governance, and really highlighted the importance of consistently applying that formal framework standard, the ISAC way.
Definitely. Your next logical step now, whether you're just starting your studies or maybe you're weeks or months away from sitting the exam, is definitely focused preparation. Using tools designed for CRISC, like FlashGenius, lets you really drill down. You can tackle domain-specific practice questions, refine your grasp of that governance-centric approach we keep emphasizing, and crucially, build the time management skills you'll need for that demanding 4-hour exam simulation.
Yeah, practicing under timed conditions is key.
Absolutely. And leverage features like interactive flashcards, too. They're great for quickly cementing those core definitions. You just have to know cold, like inherent versus residual risk, or the precise definitions and purposes of KRIs and KCIs. Get those fundamentals locked down.
Because, as we know, the value of achieving CRISC doesn't just stop the moment you get that pass notification.
That is the ultimate truth, isn't it? Maintaining the certification requires ongoing commitment. Continuous professional development, or ACPE's ISACA, mandates a minimum of 20 CPE hours every single year and 120 over 3 years.
Right, you have to stay current.
Which brings us to a final, important, and maybe ongoing question for you, the listener, to think about. As a certified risk professional, or an aspiring one, how will you ensure your knowledge stays current? How will you keep your organization's risk program resilient, especially when you're facing risks that are evolving faster than ever before? Specifically, looking ahead, how are you going to approach governing the complex risks associated with the rapid adoption of things like decentralized technologies, blockchain, and especially generative AI? What ongoing steps will you take to maintain your role not just as a risk manager, but as a proactive risk expert and strategic advisor?